Hello and welcome to 2021, where we're starting it off with the first podcast on the Dynamo podcast network of 2021, with the new podcast, Retrotainment, where we're going to look back at old films, video games, computer games, some CDs, anything from the past, just to see, does the nostalgia carry it, or does it really have a place in our hearts though, because it deserves to be. This week I am joined by another Dynamo's Podcast Network host, uh, Niall Hogan, host of the Upper Tier and one of the four pod men. How are you doing?
Really good, great to have me on. Really looking forward to this. This is something I really enjoy. I love all retro nostalgia type stuff. Really get you going.
Yeah, well, just as a little inside information, this idea kind of came from yourself. This was something that you were, I don't know if you were thinking about doing it, but you had the idea for the podcast, but obviously you already had a lot on your plate with doing the four pod men and doing the Upper Tier. So
Yeah, I was brainstorming with Ian one night, and we were talking about different shows that we could add to the network, because obviously we continually want to expand the network all the time. And a couple of ideas came up, and one was like a retro sort of movie TV, just a retro overall show. I suppose these things always come around even closer to Christmas, because obviously when you get into the Christmas period, you're back watching all the Indiana Jones and the Die Hards and the Supermans and yeah, the Star Wars and all the old retro stuff. So it kicks that nostalgia buzz in big time. And yeah, so that's kind of where it spawned from. We thought, yeah, that'd be a great idea. But obviously with myself and Ian, we're kind of chaotic with the podcast that we're in at the moment and stuff like that. So we said if we could find someone, no one better than yourself, Ted, to get involved in retro stuff.
yeah, exactly. And I'm the same as you. I'm constantly going back and watching things from the past. Like there is that nostalgic feeling, that buzz that you get, and it does bring you back to your childhood a bit when you sit down and you watch something that you watched when you were, a kid, and like even if like you were just sitting down watching the TV or whatever as a kid, it does kind of bring you back to that kind of safety of the rest of the world's problems are kind of gone for a little bit as you sit down and you watch that.
Yeah, kind of like it's just, especially in current times at the moment where people are on lockdown and struggling mentally with COVID and all this kind of stuff, you know what I mean? It's great to like reflect back on your childhood and your adolescence and the stuff that was that you cherish. And I've three kids here, and one of my sons, Ben, he's I'm pushing him through all the retro stuff at the moment. You'd see from my Facebook updates at the moment, like he's been watching Dirty Harry, Goodfellas. We've been watching, last night we watched Heat. He's just after completing the Police Academy series.
Oh,
Like it's just such classic stuff, you know what I mean? And he's actually blown away by it. We watched Speed the other night with Keanu Reeves,
oh yeah.
absolute belter of a movie. We still have Point Break on the list, the ex-presidents and all that. Like, so like really, really cool classic stuff. He's a big Star Wars fan, loves the Mandalorian,
Oh,
obviously, because it's on
brilliant.
there,
Yeah.
but loves all the old class stuff as well. So for me, it's like me reliving my childhood through his eyes as well, introducing him to this stuff. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's just great fun. It's great sort of friendship to have as a father and son as well.
Yeah, I'd say that's one of the big things is especially for parents, being able to sit down and watch something and kind of have the kid. And now kind of nostalgia and collecting figurines and stuff is it's widely accepted. People don't really have that big a deal with it, but kind of like 20, 30 years ago, that kind of was frowned upon. It was kind of, that's a real nerd thing, and you didn't tell your friends about it. It was it was your dirty little secret that you had all these toys and you collected them and stuff. Not so much now. And I think a lot of people, when they got older 30 years ago and they had the kid, they were now able to go out and buy this stuff, and there was no stigma. Like you yourself, you sell wrestling figurines and DVDs and things and stuff in your shop, and I don't know, mate. Like you weren't open back then, obviously, but even back then, people would have been kind of, I don't really want to go in and buy that, like, because the shopkeeper's going to look at me and people around me, and what's he buying toys for, essentially. But when you had a kid with you, you could buy whatever you wanted, and you could say it was for the kid, but when you got home, that was for you, and it was hidden away. And I think that's part of, like, retro has kind of allowed people to go back and rewatch stuff that they watched when they were kids and get into that. And now that if they want to go and collect something, like a figurine or a collectible of some sort, that they can go and do that now, because retro has become such a big thing. Like, even in the film industry, they've re-released a lot of films. Bill and Ted, which was huge back in the day, they released a third film, which no one was expecting before they said they were doing it. So people are able to look back and reflect on these things and re-release. Well, not re-release, but make new films from old franchises. And I think some people don't like that. They say, oh, it's Hollywood running out of ideas and stuff. I don't think it is. I think it's just that Hollywood's going to cash in on what's popular, and what's popular at the moment is this retro nostalgic buzz. So of course they're going to rebuild brands and things.
Yeah, well, I think if you look, I mean, not to give that away, and I'm sure hopefully everyone has watched it this stage, but if you watch The Mandalorian, the Mandalorian nearly ends nearly every episode with a bit of a take back and a nostalgia buzz. And certainly the end of season 3 pulled on people's heartstrings big time.
Yeah, huge.
Of it, you know what I mean? So like, reflecting back is not a bad thing, and it's a good way. And when you think about Disney with The Mandalorian, they've hit the spot with that really big time, because their previous foray into Star Wars, let's say, has been questionable at best. So The Mandalorian's been refreshing that they brought your man John back as well to do it. But yeah, it's kind of like, I kind of like, because I grew up in a time as well, like I started following wrestling at a very young age, and like I remember going to school, like no one in my class, bar 2 or 3 of us, actually followed wrestling, and we kind of spoke about it ourselves, like it, like that sort of Dead Poet Society kind of thing.
Yeah,
and,
over in the corner.
Yeah, we kind of like, we'd made out at lunch break or at small break or something like that, and go, yeah, did you see it last night? It was awesome, wasn't it? You know what I mean? But no one else knew what the hell we were going on about. They all thought we were crazy, like, you know what I mean? So I kind of never really cared. And then a lot more people kind of got on board as it exploded and went into Attitude Errors and Hogan and Warrior and all these different things, you know what I mean? And retro was very like that as well, you know what I mean? It's like, there's no frowning upon being a collector anymore. If you're a collector, it's kind of a cool thing. It's like a badge of honor, really.
Yeah.
And I think you can see from my background, I'm crazy collector. You know what I mean?
Well, and why shouldn't you be? You know, that's your money. If you want to spend it on that, who's anybody to judge anybody for what they collect? Like, everyone collects something. Like, some people collect, like, I can see yourself, you have, some of the scarves and stuff from obviously matches and things you've been to. Like, some people collected them, but they'd have frowned upon people collecting something else.
Yeah.
But I mean, you're still collecting scars, Like, I could look at that and be like, what are you collecting them for?
Yeah, I've a kind of a wide variety of stuff that I collect, I mean, I say it to people as well when people ask me what music I like. My playlist on my phone is absolutely crazy. You know what I mean?
Mine would be quite eccentric as well. Yeah, like,
I mean,
mainly I'm the long hair, the rocker, and that's what everyone expects. And to be fair, they're right to expect that, because when I was 13, 14, 15, that sort of age, you pick your music and that's the one you're into. You didn't like anything else, you couldn't admit you liked anything else. And I remember Jericho talking about it once, where he got interviewed when he was like, I think he was like 15 or 16 or something, outside of Bryan Adams or something was playing in his town, and he was caught on telly, oh, what do you think of Bryan Adams? And he said he wasn't gonna, say shit because he wants to be on the telly. So he's like, yeah, he's pretty good. And he got slagged, ridiculed by all his friends that were into rock music and stuff, because he said, oh, Bryan Adams is all right. And he was like, no, I didn't mean it. Yeah. But like, when he looks back now, he's like, why did I care? Like, Bryan Adams is good. Like, why did I care? Yeah. And that's the way I was when I was a kid. So when I was younger, it was rock music and rock music only. But as I got older, I was like, I really do love all this other stuff. Like, I enjoy listening to that. So why shouldn't I just have it lashed in there?
Yeah, I suppose when we think about it, there's probably 60 to 70 retro movies out there, maybe, that we sort of put into this sort of, if you want, like a time capsule, our go-to kind of movies and stuff.
Yeah,
like
there is. Yeah.
So it's a massive for you and the podcast and stuff like that. It's a massive time capsule to open, really. You know what I mean? And it's quite exciting, because I get really excited about a lot of these movies, you know what I mean? Because they do remind me of good times in my life, at a time where you're within bad times in your life because of COVID and lockdown and business, all that type of thing. So it's refreshing,
Yeah, it is. So this week, with the obviously with Cobra Kai being one of the biggest shows, I'd say it's up there with Mandalorian. I'd say those two are kind of two of the biggest shows. Mandalorian is Disney's one, and Cobra Kai, which originally, I believe, was a YouTube series. that they made, and then Netflix picked it up, which just shows what can be done. Like, people think, you know, you have to be with these big companies, but you don't. Like YouTube, like Cobra Kai was a hit on YouTube, but you know, people don't go to YouTube to watch series. So when Netflix picked it up, it gained a huge amount of popularity. But season 3 was just released there yesterday. So with that in mind, I said that for the first one, maybe we should just go with the Karate Kid, the original, 1984, summer of 1984. It was released. It wasn't, you know, it didn't have any. I wasn't around then, but I don't remember there being any sort of big hype around this film. You know, obviously it had its promotionals in the cinema and the odd ad on telly, but I don't think anybody was expecting this to become not even a cult classic, but a classic in a lot of people's eyes. Some films just become cult classics and then gain popularity and notoriety from that. But I think this just hit the ground running, with a box office of 100 million by the end of it, which, you know, when you're looking back at 19, people might say now that 100 million's not really that much, but you have to look back at this as 1984, like different time, different money. Like I wasn't born then, but were you going to the cinema then? A cinema ticket then was probably what?
Oh yeah, I was going then. I was born in 1972, so I would have been 12.
Yeah, so what? A
This,
cinema ticket would have been a couple of euro, a couple of pounds or something then, would it? Like,
not even that. You probably would have got in for about like you know, an old pound or something like that. You know what I mean?
yeah, that's
Like
what I mean. Like,
I remember at that age you could go into town. I used to go into town with friends of mine and we go to the movies. You'd be able to buy something, go to the movies, and get your McDonald's after it and all for about £15.
yeah,
You know
sure.
what
I
I mean? You'd
remember.
have a great day in town because we used to go in and do the arcades and all and everything.
Yeah.
You know, used to
Ah,
go in
the
and play.
arcades. I miss them.
Yeah, we used to go in and play the old Return of the Jedi games and all and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Oh, I miss the old arcades.
Like,
There is a place in town. I don't know if you've been to it. That does all the old arcade games. Obviously, no one's gone to it now. 'Cause it's all closed down. But they have a lot of the old arcade games.
yeah,
I went in there with work. And like work kind of organized it as like a bit of a joke. Like, we'll go there for a couple of minutes,
yeah,
and like we'll grab something to eat there. And like we had to sit down and have this food. I'm like, you know, the food was grand, but I didn't want to sit down and eat food. Like, I was sitting in
yeah,
there, hadn't been in an arcade,
yeah,
and like the old what was it? The old WrestleMania game was there on the, you know, the analog joystick, and I was just
yeah,
looking at that, and I was like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah.
there's a queue. I kind of want to play that. So I went off and played a few games, and they're like, come on and sit down. I was like, oh,
Yeah, all my favorite
not
games
what
back
I'm
then.
here.
I used to play Paperboy was a big one.
Yeah.
Gauntlet was a big one. And what was the other one you used to play? Pac-Land. You know the one where Pac-Man used to run along?
Yeah, on his
Yeah.
little legs.
Oh man, I love that game. The amount of
Yeah.
hours I spent playing that game is ridiculous.
I grew up, like arcades were kind of gone. It had kind of become more the you know, the sitting into the car boot seats and things
Yeah,
like that as I was
yeah,
growing up. But
yeah,
the bowling alley and Bray always had a couple of arcade games back then.
yeah,
One of them was a Virtual Soccer was one of
yeah,
them.
yeah,
There was a tennis one, and then Metal Slug 3. I used to
yeah.
pump money into Metal Slug 3. Me and
Uh,
one of the boys sitting beside us. And yet half the time one of the buttons didn't work because it'd been mashed too much. So you were just like, come on, couldn't get
yeah,
anything done. It was a
yeah.
disaster.
Yeah, the one we used to go into was that Broadway one. It used to be just at the top of O'Connell Street. It's beside where you know where the donut kiosk is.
I do, yeah, I do know
And
where that is
wait till I
actually.
tell you, sorry, that donut kiosk was even there back then. That
Yeah.
donut kiosk is there.
Oh, it's been there forever. It's a
Years.
staple. Like, it's a staple.
Yeah,
Talk
it's
about
mad.
nostalgia.
Yeah,
You can't not go and like you're in
yeah,
town. You want a donut.
yeah,
People are talking about their Boston donuts, their offbeat donuts, all these other
yeah,
things. You want a nice sugar donut?
yeah,
There's only one spot in town. There's only one.
yeah. Real
Yeah,
retro
that's the
donuts.
stuff.
You know what
But
I mean?
yeah, no. So this was released. I normally don't really look up things like this, like ratings on films, because I generally don't care about what a film rated myself. But I said I'd have a look and see, because I don't think I've ever talked to anyone who didn't enjoy the original Karate Kid at the very least. So I said I'll have a look now and see what the ratings were. So I went on to Rotten Tomatoes, and with critics, I think there was less than 50 critics that gave it a rating, but overall I had an 89%, which is, you know, that's pretty good.
Yeah,
Um, and then an audience score of 82%, so that's still really good. And audience can just be anybody. And you know what some people are like, they'll, you know,
yeah,
this film's old, one
yeah,
star. So like, You
Yeah,
know, you're talking
yeah,
an IMDb 7.3 out of 10. So you're talking, you know, a fairly well loved film that seems to
yeah,
both critics and audience score alike. Like some films you'll see critics praise to the heavens, and you know, you can tell they're being paid to praise this film because the audience score is down in the 20s, and you're like, well, there's obviously something not good about this.
mm,
But like to see them both in and around like 7% isn't really anything when you're talking about thousands of votes and things. So
yeah.
it just shows how well this film kind of held up.
Yeah, these film rating things like Rotten Tomatoes and stuff like that, they're kind of weird as well because, if there's any slight deviation in the rating at all, it drags the sort of medium down on it, that
Yeah,
kind of
it
way,
does.
and
Yeah,
it really kind of kills it, and especially at the time. I mean, this was coming out at a time as well where probably some of the Bruce Lee movies and stuff, like they
yeah,
were probably doing really well at that time as well, and it was kind of like we were beginning to see move into that era of sort of action type movies. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and it got a very good ratings considering that like its underlining sort of message was kind of karate and stuff like that, and like karate wasn't that like exciting really. I remember when the movie came out, it did spawn up a lot of karate sort of clubs,
That's what
um
I was going to
and
ask. Yeah, like,
and it did have a big influence, but the one thing I noticed as well is that a lot of these karate clubs, they kind of worked in isolation and stuff like that. But then they actually started running tournaments on the back of this movie. Like, so a lot of
yeah,
karate clubs would be running tournaments against each other and stuff like that. So like it did have that kind of pop culture effect and that kind of that kind of influence. I know like hundreds and thousands of karate clubs spawned up in the US on the back of it and stuff like that.
mm,
And karate kind of became cool again because everyone sort of judged karate as a form of self-defense as opposed to a form of sort of, if you like fighting. Um and so it was always that sort of like, uncool brother of sort of kung fu or,
yeah.
even the different types of karate, had different sort of ways of doing things and different gradings and stuff like that. And also, I do remember karate being a big deal then on the back of the movies and stuff like that, and all, and people getting more interested in it.
Yeah, that was something I was going to ask you because obviously, like this film's come out a bit before my time, so it wasn't something that I got to see growing up. But when I was growing up, kind of two, and these are the two of the huge films for me as well. Like I said, they're definitely going to be done on this podcast at some point. But anyone who knows me, like two of the biggest films for me growing up and still to this day were Space Jam, which is obviously basketball, Michael Jordan and the Looney Tunes, and then the Mighty Ducks, which used to be on, and I haven't seen it on the telly since, but when I was a kid, that used to be on that used to be one of the Christmas films. Now, whether it's really a Christmas film or not, that's when it was on. It was on every Christmas, the big movie, 6 p.m. One of them was on each year, so you might watch Mighty Ducks 1 year, Mighty Ducks 2 the following year. And in some years it'd be back to Mighty Ducks 1 and Mighty Ducks 3 wouldn't have been on, but then the following year you get three. So I used to watch them. And obviously over here, ice hockey never really took off, but I remember even then on the back of them that basketball was something that I got into. I was just like, oh yeah, I'd love to play that. I went there and I played basketball a bit here and there, but like I'm a small guy now and I was even smaller then. So, and it was just kind of a load of lads running around playing. There was no real coaching, no real anything.
Yeah,
Like it
yeah,
wasn't something that was looked at as a sport over here, whereas it would have been in the States. And I'd imagine basketball kind of took off a good bit then. Now it obviously still had its big following because the NBA was there. I'm sure Michael Jordan was the biggest thing in the world. But that's why I was like the Karate Kid obviously had the same effect. People saw it and they were like, "This is cool. Like this is something like I could do. Like something I want to do."
yeah. I kind of just remember, like, I remember, even thinking back to my school time, that crane kick became a feature of a lot of
Yeah,
schoolyards. You know what I mean? It was just like lads were just obsessed with it. Like, I
and I mean it's
didn't.
not going to work. Like you do that, some
No.
lads just going to sweep the leg and you're gone. But
Yeah, yeah, and that whole sweep the leg thing as well, that was kind of like these slogans that came out of it that are
yeah,
there even now. Like you even hear UFC fighters to these days screaming things like "sweep the leg" and going around with these little slogan T-shirts on them and all.
yeah,
It's
it's
pretty
great.
cool, like it's cool throwback, and
Yeah, I
you
always
know,
remember one of the things that in the scene where he his leg is sore and he gives him the big clap and rubs his hands to heal the knee.
yeah,
Alien Ant Farm had a video at one point for one of their songs. What was it? Something about go to the movies or something like that. I can't remember the name of the song, but they're obviously watching the Karate Kid, but they're not going to pay to use the Karate Kid. So what they did was they have the lead singer in the crane kick position, and then he goes down in the leg sore, and they have Mr. Miyagi run in, and he's like, oh, and he heals the leg. And sure, that must have come out in the early 2000s or something. So
Yeah.
even then, this film was
Yeah.
still getting those little references from people, you know.
Yeah, well, I think the whole Mr. Miyagi thing. I mean, he's probably more iconic than LaRusso when you think about it down through the
He
years.
is, yeah,
I mean, he's
100%.
a. I mean, if you're buying a Karate Kid T-shirt, Miyagi has to be on it, or Miyagi Dojo or something like that.
Yeah,
You
well,
know?
otherwise it's just some kid, like, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
Like, I know LaRusso is the main character,
yeah,
but he's not the main character either,
yeah,
because the main character is Mr. Miyagi, who is the trainer. He's the,
yeah.
you know, he's the guiding light in all this.
Yeah, I think the premise of the movie is really the dynamic between the two of them, really, isn't it? It's the highly educated Mr. Miyagi, you know, who has these life experiences, and then you've got Daniel LaRusso there, who's trying to muddle his way through life, who's dealing with a lot of stuff he hasn't had to deal with before, and Miyagi trying to keep him on the straight and narrow, you know what I mean? Trying to give him these life goals.
Yeah,
Um,
well, I mean, like, the film starts off obviously with Daniel LaRusso moving from New Jersey to California, and you can tell, like, pretty much from the off that he's not happy about this. As you know, like, I never moved as a kid. Like, I've lived in the same spot my whole life, but like, any idea of, even like, when I was a kid, like, if I look back when I was a kid, and even now, like, if I think, like, oh, if I was to move, and not just, you know, down the road, like from Bray to Shankill or something like that, you know. And even that would have been considered a big move for me, because it'd have been like, I won't be, my friends from school won't be right there. Like, the lads I hang around with in the estate and stuff, they won't be there. Like, that would have been considered a big deal to me. Like, this kid's moving, like, New Jersey, California, you're moving across country, like, um, and you can tell from the off, like, he's not happy about this. So any friends he did have, they are gone. Like, those, like, and this is before, like, people now, like, kids now might look at that and be like, oh, you can just keep in contact with them. Not back then. Like, you'd have had to be sending postcards to the lads, and like, that's only going to last so long when you're, you know, presumably, like, he gets his driver's license in this film, so you're presuming he's in and around kind of the 14, 15, 16-year-old mark. I don't really know what age they can get a provisional license over in the States at, but over
Heck,
here it's 16, so
yeah,
I'm presuming it's in and around then. So
yeah.
you're in your teen years, you know, you're angsty, you're angry, you know, life's kind of, you're going through changes anyway, and then you're uprooted and brought down to this new place where you're gonna have no friends, no nothing. And you can tell from the off when his mom's singing about California, and he's just not happy, that, like, this is just not something that he wanted. So
Yeah, I could imagine it's a massive cultural shock. I mean, if you think about moving from the East Coast to the West Coast, my God, what a dynamic! Like, I mean, how those two places are actually connected to the same country is beyond me. Like,
yeah,
it's
and they
poles.
drive as well. That's the funny thing. They drive the whole way in this
Yeah,
car that him and his man have to get out, or that he has to get out and push to start it, because the engine's so
yeah,
dodgy. Like, that's a long ass drive. Like, that's days and days in the car with your mother. Like,
it's kind of really the summary of you know when they tell you to go to California to find the dream.
yeah,
You know that this was the epitome of that. You know, leaving with, like, you know, a few bucks in your pocket, a car that barely works, and trying to go find your new life. And like, you can see even culturally, and even if you look at New Jersey is even a culture within itself on the
yeah,
East Coast. You know what I mean? Whereas California, okay, you have LA and stuff like that was kind of out there on its own, but there's a certain consistency in California. Um, you know, from San Francisco right down. But yeah, to compare that to New Jersey and living in New Jersey, which is, you know, I know California's on the coast as well, but Jersey's kind of that, like, sort of small seaside town.
yeah. But like, that's
You
like
know?
saying, you know, I'm on the East Coast here, like over in Ireland. Like, that's like say go over to the West and live there. Like, there's even a difference there, and that's nothing in comparison. Like,
Yeah, it'd be like moving from Dublin to say Mayo or something like that.
yeah,
But
it's a
sort of,
different, like, it's different.
it's just a different vibe. It's a different lifestyle, and it's like, and it's kind of like, I suppose if you're in New Jersey, I would imagine New Jersey is kind of tight. You know, from the sounds of talking to people and listening to people from New Jersey, everyone knows everyone's business. It's kind of tight, and you're kind of in there in the community. People know you. You know yourself. And you go to California. California's so anonymous. Like,
Yeah,
everyone is just everyone. You know what I mean? And you're all in this melting pot that gets stirred. And some people fall out of it, become stars and do well and be successful, and then the rest just get sort of rinsed down the
Yeah,
drain.
I think New Jersey kind of tends to be a little bit more kind of straight down the middle. It's not rich to poor in the way that California, like California is very, some people are very rich and then
Yeah,
some people are very poor in California. And that's to
yeah,
do with, as you said, like people have moved there to live the dream, which is essentially what happens here because his mother moves down and he talks about that her job is going to be something to do with space and engineering and stuff like that.
yeah,
And then the first time we see her working, she's working in a fucking restaurant.
yeah,
I mean, this is just the epitome of someone moving down, failed dreams, and she's telling them in the restaurant like, "Oh, I'm gonna go for a manager's job, and it's way better, and it's better than that space job ever was going to be." And you're looking, and you're like, "Well, that's obviously not true." But like, you're trying to convince yourself as well as your
yeah,
kid that you know that you've landed on your feet and that this is good for you, and it's
yeah,
not. But this is someone who's gone down and they failed, and you can even see the love interest in this Ali with an eye. Her parents are from the rich side of California, and he's living in Reseda, which is obviously considered to be one of the poorer parts.
yeah,
And her parents are kind of they're put out that she's going out on a date with this lad at all when he mentions that he's from Reseda and that is the mother's car has to be push started and that he didn't have his own car and things like that. So you can kind of see like that's what California was like, and this is a young kid in his teenage years having to move there with. He makes a friend pretty much straight off the bat when he kicks that door open into his mate's face, into Mike's face. Is it
yeah,
Mike? Or no, Freddie, into Freddie's face.
yeah,
But sure, Freddie and his mates all turn their back on him nearly straight away after they bring him down, and he gets into the fight with Johnny LaRusso. So like he has no friends, and he
yeah,
never has any friends. His only friend in the whole film is Mr. Miyagi and
yeah,
Ali and his mom. Like that's
yeah,
it.
yeah. Yeah, the mum is trying to bridge the gap between, like, Miyagi is trying to teach him the life goals and stuff like that and the principles of life and stuff like that. And the mother's trying to, fill in the gap there in terms of relationships and
Yeah,
all that kind of thing. So it's a really interesting dynamic. And I think what she's trying to do is she's trying to, smooth over and convince him that they had made the right move. Because I mean, obviously going back to New Jersey, you never want to go back like a failure and stuff like that, like that.
yeah.
That's
And
just
that's
not
it.
an
She
option.
tries to convince him that everything's good and that
Yeah,
everything will be fine and things like
yeah,
that. And he like at one point he basically just flips out at her.
yeah,
I just want to go back and like you look at that and people might say that's over dramatic and yeah he's gotten into a few fights with Johnny LaRusso. I mean he gets knocked down this massive hill on his bike, which he goes home and all he has is a little cut on his head. Like I mean, no broken bones, no nothing.
yeah,
Talk about luck, but he's going home and he's just, I want to go home. People might say it's a bit over dramatic, but like you're 15, like you are going to react like that. You are going to be angry and you'll take it out on, like, obviously it's not the bike's fault that this stuff happened, but he takes it out on this inanimate object and he's just screaming about wanting to go home and calls his mother out on, not asking him how he felt about moving and stuff. Like that's all stuff that when you look back at and you're like, that is how you would react if you were a kid.
yeah. I think some of that, some of the acting that he played in that was fantastic in terms of not being able to fit in and the pressures on teens to try and fit into different situations and stuff like that. And I think that even stands up true even to today. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
it's not a timing thing really from a retro point of view, but I think he really acted it out well. You could see the way like he used to lose his mind and he'd flip out and stuff like that and all. When the pressure would bubble over. I mean, obviously there was a lot of pressures in school and stuff like that. He was having pressures trying to fit in with the girls and stuff like that. He was kind of the most uncool, cool guy, if you like. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
he
Like he,
was. Yeah, like
he, he
the
really
the
struggled.
the most popular girl, or like obviously you don't really get any indication that she's the most popular, but that's kind of the premise they're giving is that she's one of these most popular girls in the school, which is highlighted by the fact that she's on the cheerleading squad and stuff, which
Yeah,
is a real US trope for that's the popular girl.
yeah,
And she has all her friends around her all the time.
yeah,
um he's trying to impress her and she seems to be impressed by him, which shows that he's in some way cool, but all her friends seem to think he's a complete loser,
yeah,
and everyone in the school thinks he's a complete loser.
yeah,
One thing I did find weird is that when he goes over, that the main sport that they focus on for him is football and not American egg ball football, like our football,
yeah.
which it can't have been big in the US at the time. I'm trying to think. the US, the World Cup wasn't in the US in and around then or anything. So I'm
No.
kind of like, what had them think? Was that to kind of highlight how different he was? Is that what the idea was here? That he doesn't play one of the big American sports? Was that like just a little subtle hint at how different he is? I don't really know.
Well, I think physically he didn't look like he'd fit into American football, nor did he look like he'd fit into sort of, wrestling or any of the typical college stuff that happens there. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
he kind of came across as a sort of like, I suppose back then we're talking '84 as well. Where kind of soccer, if you like, and
yeah,
sort of, he was kind of that soccer, tennis, maybe gymnastics type of thing,
yeah.
what I mean? And he kind of like, I think it was their way in the movie of sort of making sure that he kind of like, he didn't come across like most of those cheerleader girls would have went out with footballers off the
Yeah,
team.
that's my point. Yeah, like was that kind of like was that
Yeah,
like it obviously has to be intentional, but it's a
yeah,
strange one that they picked
yeah.
football, like because it's not something that like even now it's not big in the US. It's getting bigger in the US, but even now it's not big. So in 1984 it was probably nothing like.
Yeah, it was just an add-on for people who didn't make football as in American football or
Yeah,
collegiate football or whatever it was. So they had to give them something to do.
yeah.
Uh,
I thought it was funny that he goes for like like presumably the trials for the school football team or whatever, and obviously the Cobra Kai lads are there, and they're already annoyed at him because he's talking to your one alley with an eye, and
yeah,
the whole thing at the beach, and Johnny Lawrence has his issue with him, so he's running along, and he gets a like it's clearly a foul. Your man doesn't go for the ball, but he hooks him, and his first instinct is, I better fight this lad. I mean, like imagine that was the case when you were in school here. Like you were picking up those fouls like every couple of minutes. You'd have
yeah.
someone take the boot to you like that.
Yeah, you wouldn't be on the pitch too long, really, if everything was ending up in a row.
Yeah, well, I mean, even in school, you'd go out at break and you'd play a game of football. Like if you didn't come in having got one of them,
Yeah.
you
Well,
were a lucky boy. So like it just shows like how they kind of viewed football. They are like, this is a big deal. Whereas it's not, it's a foul, but it's not a big deal. Like no one that like watched football would think, yeah, that's how I'd react to that. Like it's not a
yeah,
leg breaker, it's not an ankle breaker, it's nothing. It's literally just he just kind of clips him as he runs
yeah.
past him. It just shows how they viewed football. That, oh, if someone did this to you, you'd get hot, and you wouldn't, like you'd be annoyed, but you'd just be like, I'll just take me a free kick, like.
Yeah. Well, this was him sowing the seed again of this whole world against him type thing, this whole
Yeah,
tidal wave. So you could see it at every point in the movie. They emphasize this all the time, that he really was the guy that just didn't fit in.
yeah, and as I said, he eventually loses the plot with his mother when he gets knocked off the bike and throws it in the bin and stuff, and then obviously Mr. Miyagi fixes the bike and has it up on the top of the stairs, and then he goes down to ask him and to say thank you, and that's when we get to see the bonsai tree cutting.
Yeah,
Um, the one thing I noticed about that is like obviously he does the bonsai tree, and then Mr. Miyagi gives his mom one and tells him to continue practicing his own one. But when he walks out of frame, so he goes out the door, you can still hear him talking a little bit, and he's like, "This guy's amazing. He's incredible," and I think that kind of just shows where like Daniel LaRusso's at. Like he's annoyed at everyone around him except this one guy who just treats him well, treats him like a human being essentially, and it
but
shows what kind of person he is. Like he is a really appreciative, like happy guy when things are kind of going his way. It's just that he feels the world is against him. It's highlighted that this is why Miyagi picks him. He's a nice kid that just he's in a bad spot, which is why he thinks he needs to fight.
well, I think the way the friendship evolves as well is LaRusso has found another guy who kind of really doesn't fit in California either, and
Yeah,
like that's where that dynamic builds from because they're kind of very similar, just divided by the age. In
yeah,
terms of like if you went back to the beginning and like Miyagi was probably that LaRusso guy when he came to California first as well. So he probably sees a lot of himself in LaRusso, and that's how the friendship evolves.
yeah. Which, like, without getting too much into Cobra Kai, that's essentially what happens in both sides of Cobra Kai. Miguel is Johnny Lawrence's student, and that happens the same way. He kind of looks at Miguel as basically what LaRusso was, this young kid who's getting punked out by the more popular kids at school and getting beaten up. So he takes him under his wing, and then LaRusso does kind of the opposite and takes in another kid who's kind of, you know, an outcast as well. So it's kind of the premise for the whole series. Like all of the anything to do with Karate Kid, that seems to kind of be the premise, is that there's one guy down on his luck, and that a mentor who kind of felt that way at some point takes him in under his wing. Like,
yeah, definitely. I also thought the use of the bonsai tree as a symbol as well, you
yeah,
know, for sort of growth and death and rebirth and all that type of stuff, I thought was very powerful in the movie.
yeah, it is. It's a great one, and then obviously it's also the it's the symbol he has on the back of the gi when he goes to the tournament, and it's
Yeah,
something that Miyagi obviously prides himself on, because as we learned, that patch is given to him by his late wife at
yeah,
some point. So it's obviously something that Miyagi feels like it's probably something when he was younger,
yeah,
was like he says his father taught him all this stuff. So it's obviously something that was instilled in him, that patience, um having like, as he says, you picture it and you just do it. So a direct focus, a patience, not rushing into everything, just taking your
yeah,
time. And that's something Daniel LaRusso needs at this time, because everything is just a rush to him, as it
yeah,
is to most kids. Everything's just getting from one place to the next. As a kid,
mm,
you don't stop to think. You don't stop to go, oh, what if I just do this? Will that help? And
yeah,
that seems to be what Miyagi tries to teach the entire time. Every
yeah,
karate lesson he teaches him seems to have a bit of a life lesson on the back of it,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, yeah,
which especially in like kind of in the 80s, that would have been a big thing. All kids films had to have a life lesson to them. They couldn't just be
yeah,
action for the sake of action. There had to be a story,
yeah,
which is nice. Like, when you look back, like some people look at that and they say, well, kids film shouldn't have to have that. But I think it's, that's good for a kid to, because the kid gets to sit down and watch it, enjoys the film, but they do learn something from it a bit. Like, they learn compassion, they learn,
yeah,
that not everything needs to be,
mm,
a
yeah.
fight.
It's especially these days when, like, you know, kids these days, they have so much pressure on them and stuff like that, in terms of society and their interpretation of what society expects of them. And it's, you know, back then it was really good because that pressure wasn't there. We didn't have the pressure of social media. We didn't have the pressure of, you know, all this, you know, information being thrown at us: Netflix, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that, you know. So, like, that's where you kind of got some of your life lessons, you know. Obviously you got them from your parents as well, and your values and stuff like that. But in terms of the movies that you looked at, they certainly left an impression on you. And you certainly, like, you know, especially, you know, I'm sure we'll get into the Star Wars ones at a later date and stuff like
Yeah.
that, but they certainly developed a lot of life lessons, you know, between, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
forgiveness and rekindling with your father and all compassion and, you know, being helpful and caring and all that kind of stuff, you know. And it comes through in a lot of these movies, you know what I mean? And especially in this one, you know what I mean? Like, you know, on the face of it, if you look at it, why would an elderly martial artist, you know, Oriental man, you know, want to care about, you know, a kind of a New Jersey kind of upstart who isn't fitting in? You know what I mean? Like, it's an unusual dynamic.
It is. And I think that dynamic lends itself to the films, having two people who are so very different, but also so very the same.
Yeah,
In they were outcasts when they came here, and that they had to find something that helped them fit in. And I think that is a dynamic that they was tried to be reached in the entire film, and it was something that they tried to teach everyone, that just because you don't think you fit in, you'll find there'll be somebody there for you.
mm,
But when you talk about like back then, that was okay. Imagine a film now being released where you have an elderly gentleman who is constantly paying all this attention to one young boy, and is bringing him to his kind of secluded house, and has him there from 6 in the morning till until it's dark at night doing chores, and
yeah,
has him out there for his birthday, and gives him a car for his birthday present on his 16th birthday and stuff
yeah.
like that. Like, you couldn't do that in a film now.
Yeah,
But
current society would have a very different
yeah,
view of
they'd
that.
have a very different view. But back then, that was just seen as, this is a kind old man.
Yeah,
And I think that's something that we do need to, like. I hate saying, people shouldn't be so weary of everyone, because you do need to be weary. Some people are out there, some people are predators, but not everyone is. Sometimes people are just trying to be nice. And I think that's something that's kind of a fear that's now being put into people, because you hear so many stories of, kids being kidnapped and, you know, all this other horrible stuff happening to kids and things. And I think that's put a lot of fear into people. Whereas sometimes maybe that fear isn't necessary. Sometimes someone is just trying to help. They are just trying to be nice. Yeah, and this film just kind of highlights that, you know, there was never anything strange in this relationship. Like, he even, when he has when Daniel flies out to him on the bike after he's meant to pick up Ali at the country club or whatever it is. Not something that is really over here, but obviously a big thing in the States, that rich people have these country clubs.
Yeah.
But he goes out to pick her up here, and obviously Johnny Lawrence gobsmacks her, and he sees it and just kind of runs off. But he goes out and he's at Mr. Miyagi's house. Mr. Miyagi's giving him, they don't really tell you what drink it is, but it's obviously an alcoholic drink because Mr. Miyagi's off his tits. Like, but you know, this kid is 15 at the time, and he's giving him alcohol. Like, that's not something that they, you know, would even be shown in a kid's film now. Like an old man giving a kid alcohol. But back then they were just kind of like, it's just something that, you know, this could happen in real life. Like, if someone's hammered and they've kind of built this bond, this relationship with someone who's, you know, sort of at the age where they're coming to an age, like, people that might not want to admit it, but like most people have had their first drink by the time they're 15 or 16 now at this point. Like, I would say there's very few out there who don't drink before that. But you get to learn a lot about Mr. Miyagi in that little segment as well, and like how much he lost, like his wife and his well, not unborn, like the child dies due to complications at birth, but you learn why he's been alone this whole time, why he doesn't seem to have a family or anything, and that he's a war hero. He has this medal of valor in his chest, and I think he refers to himself as a sergeant as well. So he's obviously quite high up in the military. Like, he's not just, you know, just some grunt worker. He's done a lot for both the country, and you can kind of see a bit of the racism in this as well, because even though he's fought for the Americans and he's done all this, and he's fighting in the 40s. I think it says 1944 is the time that he gets this letter, which is, you know, you're looking at World War II.
Yeah.
The Japanese aren't on the American side during this war, you know. So it just shows that, like, where his loyalties was with who he felt was right and I mean, there's no right and wrong in a war, but, you know, the Japanese were on the side of the Nazis during that war, so they were on the wrong side of it. But it shows where his loyalties kind of were, and that it was kind of for the people that needed the help, and not just, he doesn't just have blind loyalty to his nation. But then when they're down at the beach, the two drunk guys that have their beer bottles on the car, they refer to him in a very racist manner, as if LaRusso owns him. Like, this young child owns this old man because of his race. And that is something that's still prevalent today. Not so much against Japanese people, but there is still a massive issue of racism today. And it's strange to see that even in 1984 that they referred to it in such a casual way, because that's what it is. Your man doesn't think, like, this drunk guy doesn't think anything of it. It's just, you know, there's nothing wrong with what he said as far as he's concerned.
Yeah, which probably wouldn't been, you know, strange in 1984
Exactly,
anyway.
yeah.
But I think it was really powerful in the movie when they did, like, unfold all this stuff about the medals and his background in the army, and also the compassion of, like, you know, his wife and the kid and all that kind of stuff. But I think what it did was it raised the profile of Miyagi in the movie.
Yeah.
In terms of the level of respect, and certainly from LaRusso's point of view, he's seen Miyagi in a very different way. He wasn't this kind of, like, you know, doddery old man teaching martial arts, you know what I mean? This guy was a legit guy. He was kind of like, you know, nearly made him out to be kind of like a badass, you know what I mean? Like, this guy could take care of himself, you know what I mean? No doubt about it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it's not really referred to much in the film, but, like, obviously he's been in the army, but then the protagonist in this film is obviously, the main one is Johnny Lawrence. And before we came on air, we were just talking about who do you like. We were talking about, you said you rewatched 2 and 3. I haven't done that. I'll probably do them at a later stage. But that you were saying that 2, you didn't feel 2 was as good as 3, and obviously 1 is at the top of the list. But you think 1 and 3 are the 2 kind of better ones. And I was saying to you that they're both the ones with with the main bad guy, John Kreese in it.
Yeah.
And that's who I think is really the bad guy. As little as he's in this first film, he's only there as the teacher, but you see that he was in the army as well. But you see that his version of being in the army was holding the gun. Like, that's what he took away from the army, was that he was in the army and he held a gun and things. Whereas Miyagi's takeaway from the army was this medal of valor and the pain of what that war caused them, because not just casualties, like this was a casualty that wasn't anything to do with the war. This was just his wife passing away. And it's not in the note, but when he's talking about it before he kind of passes out drunk, he says, your wife has passed away, no doctor came. And that just kind of shows how things were viewed, because they were Japanese, that doctors kind of didn't really focus on her, because, you know, Japanese were seen as the bad guys, and that this man lost his wife and his newly born child because of his race, because of where he was from, even though he's out. And a Medal of Valor, I had to look this up because I wasn't really sure what it was for, but it's for outstanding bravery. So it's not just like a generic medal of thanks for fighting in the war. Like, he did something above and beyond, and it goes to a committee. So the committee has to determine the level of danger that you put yourself in, how many lives were saved because of what you did and stuff. So this isn't just some, you know, a thank you gift to him. Like, this is something he obviously earned. We don't learn what he's got it for, but what he takes away from his time in the army is that he was a war hero, but that it cost him, you know, his wife and his child. Whereas John Kreese takes away from the army is, I was in the army and I got to have a gun, because that's the only thing you see about him being in the army is the picture of him with the gun, and he seems happy about it. So like this brutality, and it's what he teaches his students as well, you know, strike first, strike hard, no mercy. It's just it's brutal. There's no compassion in what he does. He's just a brutal man, and he's the teacher, the sensei to these kids, and this is what he passes down, which is why we see the likes of Johnny Lawrence and Bobby and Tommy and all, like the other guys. That's what they've learned. That's what they've been taught. So they think this is the influence that an adult has had on them, someone that they trust. And so this is how they've grown up. This is what they think they need to be champions, because they obviously, as much as like we can see that he's the bad guy, that John Kreese is this horrible human being, that's not how they viewed him. They viewed him as, you know, someone to be looked up to, and that they strived to be him. So that's why I think that's where the second film kind of falls down, is you don't have John Kreese, who is this ultimate bad guy, like poisoning children's minds and stuff.
Yeah, I think it was perfect casting as well, John Kreese as well, because obviously when we look at this movie, but obviously he was in other movies where he was a proper turncoat and stuff like that.
Yeah,
you know?
he is. He's just an ultimate bad guy, isn't he? He's just that kind of guy.
You got to remember as well, isn't he the guy that left Rambo on top of the hill as well?
Yeah, he is. Yeah,
He
and
was the
I think
pilot.
some people are just cut out to be that, you know, the
Yeah,
dick.
he just has that look. But I also find as well is you can see throughout the movie as well in the way like he struggles with the level of the badness as well, and he needs the students to sort of carry out his bidding, if you like.
Yeah.
And then even after a while, then you get the students even looking at him going, this is
It's a
way
bit much,
beyond even
yeah.
us as well, you know what I mean? Because he's kind of he's riddled with contempt. And it really comes true in him, you know. So those other guys, they're trying to he's trying to turn it up a notch all the time, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he's, you know, he keeps on playing that us against them card all the time. And
Yeah, and I
you know
think
what I mean?
that's a good like kind of juxtaposition to LaRusso, because if LaRusso doesn't meet Mr. Miyagi, you can imagine him becoming a guy like John Kreese, where, you know, it's us against me against the world mentality, because that, like, they never referred to it, but you can kind of tell that that's what John Kreese's childhood was like, was that he wasn't a very popular guy. He didn't get on with people, and that therefore he's built up this contempt for everyone around him, and that's why he's so, you know, mean and nasty to everyone around him. And that then he's, you know, he's teaching people that this is how you have to be. So you can kind of see that Miyagi's had troubles in his life, Kreese has had troubles in his life, but that they both went down this different path, and that both Lawrence and LaRusso are on this path, and they've each kind of picked which path like to stray off down. One goes with Miyagi, one goes with John Kreese, and it just shows that like this is, you know, it kind of shows that the choices you make in your life do matter. You know, sometimes if you choose to act and be violent, you'll end up down a bad path, and if you choose to, you know, just defend yourself and just kind of keep your nose a little bit clean, you can end up down the Mr. Miyagi path sort of thing.
Yeah, and also, I mean, you've kind of nearly given away the plot for number 3, really,
Yeah,
because
pretty
that's
like
because that's basically what happens in 3. And 3 questions his friendship with Miyagi, falls out with him, and gets led by the nose by Terry Silver, who
yeah,
is basically, to me, is the ultimate heel in the trilogy, really. You know what I mean? Like, because he's such a snake. He's that kind of like, he reminds me of Jericho in the wrestling, really. You know what
yeah.
I mean? Like, it just turns on you in a second. So yeah, that's and then we could say that affirms your point, really, that like LaRusso was so impressionable, really. Like, you know what I mean? If you say the right things to him, you can practically get him to do anything, you know? That
And I
kind
think like that's kind of what, you know, 14, 15-year-old kids are kind of like, you know, they
yeah.
are very impressionable. Like, and that's unfortunately where a lot of people make their life choices, and that's what they become as an adult. If they get brought down a very bad path at that age, it can kind of, it does like can determine your life in a way. Now, obviously, you can turn that around. You know, as you get older, you realize the things you've done wrong and turn your life around completely. But at that age, you are so impressionable.
Yeah. And then, I mean, even I suppose when we move on in it, then we talk about, like, you know, we get into the training and the paint the fence and the wax on, wax off,
Yeah,
and
and
which
that's
we
one of the big things. Wax on, wax off.
wax
Like as you
off.
said, like that's a
Yeah,
big pop culture reference. Like nearly everyone gets that. Even people who
yeah,
haven't seen
yeah.
Karate Kid, which there
Yeah.
probably isn't many now, but like they would have got that reference. You know, they knew it was something.
Yeah, and it still stands up to this day. You still see the T-shirts with the slogans on
Yeah,
it. You know what I mean? I think the underlying thing in it was like, it was presented as a trade-off for teaching them karate and stuff like that. But it was really, again, Miyagi giving these life lesson goals that, like, you know, nothing's ever easy. Everything has to be earned. And in fairness to LaRusso, he embraced it, you know what I mean? Even though he questioned it at times, he goes, you know, you have me, you know, cleaning the floor, you have me waxing these cars, you know, you have me painting this fence. And it was like Miyagi was just coming up with thing after thing after thing. And LaRusso was starting to feel like it was a punishment to him. Like,
yeah.
he
Well,
was,
you see his anger burst out of him
yeah,
again there, where he gets
yeah,
angry at the only person he's friends with. He's like, "You're just taking advantage of me. Like this is just," and it is child labor. I mean, he's getting
yeah,
him to paint his house and clean his cars. Like, it is child labor, but as you say, there's a point to it. He's teaching them, you know, patience, resilience, you know, building a muscle memory as well, which is basically what he says karate is about. It's just muscle memory. Just remember what to do, what to block, how to block. Like he won't teach him to strike, which LaRusso thinks is all karate is about. He's like, it's about striking first.
mm,
Um, which is something that he just sees John Kreese teaching the class kind of once or twice. And you can see even he's thinking that that's what karate is about. It's about striking first. And Miyagi has to kind of like beat that out of him with these like mundane, menial tasks where he's like, no, it's not about like striking is part of it, but defense is the best form of offense in this scenario.
yeah, absolutely. And then you kind of get onto this real powerful moment in the movie. It's like, you know, where they're sort of tit for tat with each other and stuff like that. And then Miyagi goes over to Kreese's dojo to confront him.
Yeah,
And that's a real powerful moment because you have Kreese here, who's this kind of commando, buff, hardened soldier. And then you have Miyagi, who looks like this little frail man. You
yeah,
know what I mean? And the stare down of Miyagi and the eyes when he looks at Kreese, you can see kind of Kreese is going, this guy might be legit. You
yeah.
know what I mean? Like, it's a
But it kind of reminds me of you know, The Simpsons when the mafia send all these guys to over to the Simpsons house, and then the Japanese mafia is out there, and there's a big fight, and there's the one guy in his white suit, which, you know, they don't refer to it being Miyagi, but like it kind of is, and he's just standing there, and Homer's like, no, I want to see what he hasn't done anything, I want to see what he does,
yeah,
and that kind of refers to Miyagi because even when Miyagi saves LaRusso the first time when he's getting
yeah,
beaten down, having that's at the school dance when he rinses
yeah,
Lawrence, who's clearly rolling a spliff in the toilet.
yeah,
Even though it's never referenced that that's what it is. It's not just
yeah.
it's not a normal cigarette. Like it's a,
No,
you know,
no.
but he saves him, and even Daniel doesn't believe him. He's like, nah, it wasn't you. It wasn't you. You're too old. It couldn't have been you. But it just shows that like that age was nothing. Like it was experience. He knew how to strike and he knew how to. And there's a little bit in that when they're beating Daniel down that I noticed is that one kid kind of says to Johnny Lawrence, he's like, he's had enough. Leave it. He's had enough. And that's this is just jumping forward a little bit, but that's a kid named Bobby. And in the semi-finals, you were saying Kreese kind of gets the kids to do his bidding, and that they're even questioning him. He sends out the kid who's in the semi-finals to take the leg and to put Daniel out of commission. And that kid is actually the same kid that tells Johnny Lawrence to stop earlier. It's the kid Bobby. He's like, stop! Like he's had enough. You can clearly see that. Yes, this guy is his sensei, but even he questions some of these methods where he's like, I mean, yeah, there's 5 of us beating on one kid. Like he's probably had enough. Like he can't even stand. And then it's like, take him out of the tournament. He's like, but I can beat him fair. And the sensei's like, doesn't matter. You're gonna do this. And he does it, but you can see like he didn't want to do it. And even when he does it, he goes straight over to LaRusso when he's on the mat, and he's like, I'm sorry. And he has to be dragged away. But you can kind of see that they do question Kreese a bit, but there's kind of a fear of Kreese as well. Like they're afraid to not do what he says.
Yeah, absolutely, because he kind of rules with an iron fist. But I think their questioning of it as well is because karate is the background to it. They think of karate as kind of honor and respect,
Yeah,
and none of this is coming true. And I think that's where the questioning comes. But I love that powerful moment in the movie when you see Miyagi and the stare. And
yeah,
like the way those old war
no
veterans
fear.
have that stare that could nearly knock you out, you know what I mean, without any physical violence,
Yeah, no fear. Even as calm as he is, there's no fear. There's no
yeah,
there's no aggression in his eyes
yeah,
either. It's not aggression that you see, but it's a confidence.
yeah, and you could
Like
tell.
I'm not worried.
Yeah, but you could tell by his eyes as well that like he's been through a hell of a lot worse than this and come out the other side smelling of roses, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's no fear in relation to some guy being a bully in a dojo, basically, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
and you can kind of see the contempt he has for Kreese as well. Like even when they first walk in, you can see the contempt he has for the way Kreese trains. Like you can see the kind of it's not on his face, but you can kind of see it in the eyes again. This kind of anger bubbling behind him, like that he's just like, this guy is just the worst. Like
Yeah, yeah. It's like when you see people running gyms for money as opposed to running gyms because they love gyms and they want to give something back, that type of thing. But you can see with Miyagi, like he always questions Kreese's honor. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Constantly through the movie and
which
stuff.
I think is fair because Kreese clearly has no honor. Like nothing. The only thing that mattered to
Yeah,
Kreese was
yeah,
winning.
yeah,
If you win, then that's honorable. It doesn't matter how it's achieved. Like if you cheat, you win. It doesn't matter. You win.
yeah,
Whereas Miyagi constantly says it doesn't matter if you win. You'll
yeah,
earn respect.
yeah,
Where it just shows the two sides of the coin. Like one is saying it's all about respect. Winning doesn't matter. The other is saying respect doesn't matter. Winning
yeah,
matters. And it's
yeah,
just obviously people aren't that black and white, which is probably the only real fault in this film for Kreese and Miyagi. They're both, you know, one's so good and the other's so bad.
yeah,
But I think that's done well because all the kids are both like there's a hot-headedness and an anger in LaRusso, but there's a calmness and a nice kid there as well. But you can see
yeah,
the same in some of the kids that are training under Kreese as well, like the kid Bobby, who's just like, oh, this is too much. Like we shouldn't be beating up on this one kid when there's 5 of us.
yeah,
Doesn't want to take him out. So you can kind of see like the kids still have this, they're not good or bad yet. And obviously no one in the world is truly good or truly bad. Like there's,
yeah,
everyone has good days and bad days, but in films, you're portrayed as one or the other.
yeah.
But the kids, they do a very good job with the kids in this film to never portray any of them as wholly good or wholly bad on either side of it.
So then the gauntlet is laid down.
Yeah,
and we'll see you at the tournament.
2 months.
Yeah, and this is LaRusso's going over because he's getting picked on and getting bullied and getting beat up, and
Yeah,
they think they're
didn't want
going
to
over
fight.
sorting out. And the next minute, he flips out on the way out, going, "You were supposed to be sorting all this out, and now you've put me in a tournament where I
Yeah.
need to fight." And it's just the dynamic is just crazy. Miyagi's just sort of sitting back laughing, like, you
Yeah,
know.
he's just like, I saved you for 2 months now. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah, that doesn't. What happens after 2 months? I'm getting my ass
yeah,
kicked.
yeah. So then they go through all
The train, the wax on,
the
wax
the
off, paint
the
up, paint
the,
down.
the Rocky Balboa training montage, if you like, you know what I mean? And we arrive at the tournament.
What I loved about this tournament is when they first arrive. So like at the start, Miyagi tells them that belts don't matter. That belts are just for something to hold your pants up.
Yeah,
But when they get there, your man's like, What belt is this kid?"
yeah,
And Miyagi's just like, "Oh, I have to give him. Why does it matter?" He's like, "I need to put him into a certain division."
yeah,
And Miyagi just goes, "Oh, black belt." Like, I mean,
yeah,
like, I'd say people who actually do karate are fuming at this because they're like, I strived for so long to get to that
yeah,
black belt, and
yeah,
this kid just does a few lessons of cleaning cars and painting
yeah,
fences, and he's a black belt, is he?
yeah. And
But
he
then he
pinches
the
the
thing.
black
Yeah,
belt off the
brilliant,
table.
isn't it?
Yeah,
And it just
and,
shows what Miyagi's. And there's a few instances of this with Mr. Miyagi when they won't. They come over and they're like, "Hey, you can only have one guy on the mat, like the one trainer," and they're like, "Oh, she's his translator." And he says something in Japanese, and she just makes up whatever he says.
yeah,
And then your man goes, "Oh," he says, "Thank you very much," and like, you look like his uncle and all this.
yeah,
But first of all, you look like his uncle in Japan. Like, this guy's like in his 70s or something, and he's talking to some guy who's 30, and you look like his uncle. Like, what? Like,
yeah,
first of all, that shouldn't be like. What the hell's going on there?
yeah,
And your man just kind of accepts it. But
yeah,
it goes on, and then as they're walking away, your man goes, "Oh, thank you very much and good luck." And Miyagi
yeah,
just turns around,
yeah.
"Thanks."
Yeah, but
Just
even
walks off.
yeah, but even when he said, what gym or who you represent, and he goes Miyagi though, and it's
Yeah.
like it's so funny. The
But
dynamic
it's
is
just
class.
it's the little jokes he has, those little quips and one-liners where you know this guy's just been told he speaks no English, and the second that they've convinced him that he doesn't speak
Yeah,
English, he speaks English and just walks off. Yeah,
yeah,
that's grand.
yeah, yeah.
Off I go.
And
But
that's a small thing that you could miss out if you didn't
yeah,
if you didn't pick up on it.
that's certain. Like in a lot of films, people miss out on stuff like that. That's some stuff
Yeah,
that, and I don't know what it is. It's just the way I like. Maybe it's just my sense of humor, but I always
yeah,
pick up on stuff like that where there's
yeah,
just something small like that where
yeah,
it's just a real throwaway comment.
yeah,
Like even that comment about, "Oh, what belt are you?" when he asks him, and Miyagi knows, or what kind of like what belt do you have? And like he clearly knows he's asking about karate. And
yeah,
Miyagi goes, "Oh, it's from JC Penney's."
yeah,
And
yeah,
he's like, "That is clearly not what I asked." But it's just
yeah,
it's a real old
yeah,
man joke as well.
yeah,
Like, ha,
yeah. It was the kind of deflection to get him in the door type of thing.
yeah. But
Yeah,
yeah, we get into the tournament. The one thing that always struck me as kind of strange is that they're like, "We'll settle this at the tournament." There was no guarantee that like if LaRusso gets knocked out in the first round, he doesn't fight anyone from Cobra Kai, so nothing gets settled. Like
yeah,
that's the one thing about this. We'll settle it at a tournament where there's no guarantee that we'll even face each other. But
yeah. Yeah,
they
this
go
was like this
in.
was like looking at an old Pride FC heavyweight tournament and hoping that Chuck Liddell and Dan Henderson got to the final.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Like it was preconceived.
yeah. Like it's all been written out. But they go in, and obviously LaRusso gets onto the mats, and at first he's like, before he even gets on the mats, he's asking about how does this work. And Miyagi says, "I don't know. I've never been at a tournament. I've never done any of this. Like I just trained. Like I've never actually used this stuff in a
Yeah,
in a tournament setting."
yeah,
So they're going in, and they've no. Two of them are like, "How the hell does this even work? Like nothing. Nobody knows anything."
yeah,
And then Ali explains, you hit someone in the chest or the head, and that's a point.
yeah.
That's
So
and
funny.
I'm sure there's probably more rules to karate because we see sometimes some like you see people get hit in the head and it's considered a foul, but they
Yeah,
never explain what makes it a foul and what doesn't. But
yeah,
whatever, it's you can get past that. But they get into the first fight, and LaRusso's obviously, you know, he's timid about this, so he keeps running off the mats
yeah,
until Miyagi tells him, just concentrate on your defense and then strike when you get the chance.
yeah,
And that settles him down. Like you kind of see what Miyagi is to him. He's not just the teacher. He's
yeah,
an internal kind of monologue where he's like,
yeah,
yes, you're scared, but that, like, just
yeah,
relax, take it easy, like.
Yeah, the work is done. He's now the psychological coach. Like it's
Yeah,
like you can do this, you can get over it. He hasn't even done it himself.
yeah. But one thing I noticed in this is that, like, obviously, like Cobra Kai is meant to be, all these are meant to be like the best fighters because
Yeah,
most of these lads get knocked out in like round one. They're all seem to get battered. Like I think
yeah,
about four of them make it to even the quarterfinals.
yeah,
Like before that, they're all getting knocked around by these other lads, and
yeah,
you're kind of like, I thought these were meant to be, you know, the best. But obviously, only two or three of them are actually any good,
yeah,
and the rest are just, they're good because they're in a group.
yeah,
But we see like obviously Daniel wins his fights. We see Johnny Lawrence dominating in his fights and things like that. And then we see some of the Cobra Kai members get knocked out by like one-off appearances from just some random kid, and then he
yeah.
obviously gets knocked out somewhere else, but you don't see him get
Yeah,
knocked
you
out.
don't see any of those fights. Yeah,
But we see now. I didn't really know the names of the other kid, like the other kids in the Cobra Kai. There's kind of the two or three main characters. So obviously Johnny Lawrence is the main one, and then there's kind of the two or three friends. Um, Tommy and Bobby are kind of the two other ones. Bobby is the one that that Daniel fights in the semi-final that presumably breaks his leg. I think that that's obviously the implication here that the
yeah,
leg is broken. But Tommy is the kid that you constantly see beside John Kreese cheering
yeah,
him on and being like, yeah, get him. And
yeah,
I think he's great
yeah,
because he's the epitome of what John Kreese teaches, like just like
yeah,
brutality, because you can
yeah,
see him just cheering. Like he has no like there's no question from him about whether what they're doing is right or wrong. He is just like, no, yeah, like we're right. Like,
yeah,
don't worry about the fact that we've cheated to get here or anything. He's just like,
yeah,
yeah, get him.
yeah,
And like you can see that John Kreese has had the biggest influence on him over everyone because
yeah,
he has no conscience about whether he should, go for this weak spot or cheat or anything like that.
yeah,
But he gets knocked out quite early in the tournament as well. Like he gets knocked out, I think, presumably in and around a quarter final. So he's not even in the final four. Like,
yeah, yeah.
so it
He's
just
the
shows that that,
he,
that mentality doesn't work.
yeah, he's the ultimate fanboy, really, isn't he? Like
Yeah,
he's the guy carrying the bucket and the towels, really. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like,
he is. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
but obviously, uh, the other fights in this kind of don't really matter all that much. We kind of see
yeah,
LaRusso just kind of he runs through them, picks up a knock on the ribs at one point, and you see him getting bandaged up. But like then that's not really referenced again after that, so it's not really important.
mm,
So like the rest of these fights are kind of just to let you know that yeah, like they did fight their way to the finals. Like the rest of
yeah,
this wasn't real, but the semi-finals we see Johnny Lawrence go into his one and just utterly dominate the guy that he's against, like 3 points to nothing, easy, and he's the previous state champion and things. So he's obviously good. Like he's not some nobody. He's been champion previously.
yeah,
And then we see the semi-final where your man Bobby gets himself disqualified on Kreese's orders and apologizes for it straight away. But LaRusso is now, we think, out of the finals, and we see him backstage, and the doctor says
mm,
no, and Miyagi says to him, it doesn't matter. You've gained their respect and stuff. And the whole film, Mr. Miyagi is trying to teach him that life is about balance within yourself, and that's
yeah,
why. So Mr. Miyagi only helps him and heals him because of what Daniel LaRusso says. He says, "I'll never have balance. I'll never have balance with Ali. I'll never have balance with Johnny Lawrence. I'll never have balance in myself." And you can see that he's learned something. He's learned from Mr. Miyagi that
yeah,
the fight, like getting to the finals, isn't about winning to him.
mm,
It's now about just I need to do this, just to prove like either this guy's better than me or this guy's not.
yeah,
But I need to know like it's not about winning to him anymore. And I think that just shows kind of the culmination of the film because at the start he's learning karate because he uses it as an aggressive art form to fight and to you know just make sure that nobody can do anything to him. And now
yeah,
he's not as concerned about whether he
yeah,
loses or wins anymore. It's nothing to
yeah,
do with that to him now.
yeah. It's like him and Miyagi. They switch. It's like a little switcheroo, really. You know, like
Yeah,
he's the boy who has suddenly become a man, and with the maturity comes through and stuff like that, and you can see the satisfaction in Miyagi when he hears it and stuff like that.
yeah. So he heals him up, brings him out, and they
Yeah,
they go into the
yeah,
final, which is best of five essentially. So first 3 points, And they get out there just in time because they're just about to hand the trophy to Johnny Lawrence. And then it's like, LaRusso's going to fight. And that's iconic because you hear that in loads of things now, you know, he's going to fight. So he comes out, you know, still kind of hobbling away, selling that injury. And he goes out and, you know, he takes the first 2 points using his defensive procedures, like just defend until the opportunity opens up and strike. And you can see, like, he's won the first 2 and you're like, okay, this is it. He's going to win. But obviously he bloodies up Johnny Lawrence, which they make him go get cleaned up. You know, you can't fight with blood all over the mats, so go to your sensei, get cleaned up. So he goes over and Kreese says, sweep the leg. And you can kind of see it in Johnny's face. He's like, oh, like, that's an injury. I know it's an injury, so I shouldn't do it. But like, sweeping the leg is fine because you see them do it in previous fights. They have no issue with it. But he now has an issue with it, not because he's been told to sweep the leg, which if he'd been told from the start when there was no injury, you can tell he'd have had no issue with, he'd have done it. But you can see that conflict in him, that he's now like, we've targeted this leg. This isn't right.
Yeah.
But he's asked, do you have a problem with that?
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to let down his sensei, and he obviously doesn't want to lose because, you know, this is a big deal to him, you know, like he prides himself on being that champion. So he kind of sells out in a way, like he knows it's wrong, but he sells out to it anyway. He says, yeah, I'll do it. So he goes out and he sweeps the leg, and that's how he wins his next 2 points by it's not cheating, I suppose, but it's underhanded. It's you know, some people will say, if you know there's an injury, why wouldn't you gun for it? You know, it's smart play, but
it's the kind of lack of honor coming through again.
Yeah.
I really liked at this point in the movie where you get that tension and music coming through and like the background, because it's in a kind of like a college gymnasium or something like that, or you get that background. It looks like a Nirvana video nearly, you know, that kind of way. People are just going crazy.
Yeah, that's one of the funny things as well. Like, this is obviously, like, it's, as you said, karate at that time isn't, you know, huge. Like, obviously we're not in the States, so maybe it was huge in the States, but I don't think it was. But like, this small karate tournament sells out to like this huge crowd, and this is something that you always see, like, because even in like the Mighty Ducks and stuff, you see like this pee-wee hockey like finals is selling out to like this big 2 or 3,000 people coming to see it, and you're like, that's not real, like, you know. But we've all been in stuff like that when we're kids, you know. It's whoever's parents are there, and maybe like an aunt or an uncle or something coming. It's not like all these random people coming to cheer you on or anything.
But the way they shot it as well, obviously, like, the stage was quite lit, but it was still kind of very smoky and very dusty. So it gave you that feeling of like an old sort of martial arts tournament type thing.
Yeah.
But you could still see people in the background. You could still see the chaos of what was going on and what was unfolding. So yeah, go ahead there.
Yeah, so you get into this final round. It's 2-2. We get to the final round. And this is where I was saying, like, Lawrence does strike him at one point in the face, but this isn't deemed a victory. He doesn't get a point for that. There's no real explanation as to why this one's considered an illegal move. I'm not entirely sure why. They never explain it, as far as I can tell. So maybe somebody who watches karate can, you know, like, who follows karate or something, might notice, can inform me.
Strikes to the face were illegal.
But you see them strike other people in the face, like with kicks, and they're counted. That's why I'm never really sure.
Yeah, but I think in karate, because it's a points thing, it's the level of
aggression,
impact, or the level of violence. You won points basically for the move as opposed to the result.
Okay, so yeah, all right. So maybe that's all it is. It's just if there's an intent to injure, it's But yeah, we see that, and then we get to the final, the crane kick, that iconic scene of him standing on his right leg with the left leg raised, crane pose, and Johnny.
And I loved the way it kept on going back to Miyagi, and you see him standing there, and
nodding his head like, this is the right move.
You could feel the tension of the whole thing. The whole movie had crescendo to this point.
And it's funny because the whole film kind of is based on Miyagi not caring about winning or losing.
Yeah.
Now that he's there, he's kind of like,
Yeah.
I want
Yeah.
this kid to win. Like, I want this
Yeah.
for him.
Yeah.
But he's in his crane position, which is obviously the ultimate move. We've learned earlier that if done correctly, there's no defense from it. That's
Yeah.
what Miyagi tells us.
Yeah.
Even though, I mean, surely if you just, don't walk into range and just kind of go around him on the side where the one leg is raised,
Yeah.
he has to like hop around. So,
Yeah.
pretty bad move in general, unless you're going to rush at this guy.
Yeah.
Which,
Clearly they were anticipating that Johnny Lawrence was going to bum rush him. You know what
yeah,
I
which
mean?
is exactly what happens. He just
Yeah.
rushes in,
Yeah.
and then basically a big scissors kick, bam, hits him in the face.
Yeah.
You land. There's no way to get around this. Like, you're going to have to land on the bad leg because
Yeah.
of you've kicked with the good leg. So he lands on the bad leg and then switches directly back to the good leg. The only issue I would have with that is if the leg is as sore as it's been, made out to be, coming down on it, I feel that maybe LaRusso should have taken a fall there.
Yeah.
But obviously that doesn't
I
lend itself to the iconic pose of landing back and still being
Yeah.
in the crane after doing the crane. So
I
I can see why they did it, but like,
I'm putting that down to adrenaline.
yeah, like that's the only thing I can think. Like, you go
Yeah.
back
I'm putting
to,
that down to adrenaline. Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
he bum rushes in, catches him with the crane kick.
Yeah.
He's the world champ. Well, I don't know if it's a world champion. They keep referring to it,
Yeah.
but he's the champion anyway.
Yeah.
And the one thing I noticed out of this, and I think it's something that people kind of forget a lot, is that when they go to hand him the trophy, Johnny Lawrence takes the trophy off him and he hands it to LaRusso, and he tells him, he's like, "You're all right, LaRusso. You're all right." And I think that's something that kind of gets forgotten about, is that
Yeah.
you do see this from Johnny Lawrence, that he realizes that he's been beaten by the better man and the respect is now there.
Yeah. It was that Hogan Warrior moment at 6 when he hands Warrior the belt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's kind of mark of respect that, yeah, I got beaten and I understand I got beaten and
I want to be the one to hand it to you rather than just have it taken from me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Only me and you should be on this platform. We're the guys who weren't this moment, and you were the better man. So yeah.
But I do think it's very strange. Like, like obviously Cobra Kai has come out now. They don't really reference it. That's kind of like, it's kind of like they look back at that bit and they're like, oh, why did we put that in the film? Because we should have kept Johnny as still, bitter, because Cobra Kai basically builds, without giving too much away, on the fact that Johnny Lawrence is still bitter about losing this tournament. But at the time, like, that's the time he'd be most annoyed, most bitter. But he's not. He's respectful and he's, congratulations.
Well, I think as well they use it as a poignant moment to sort of like a kick back to Kreese. That like even his main number one bad guy has moments where he can accept.
He's a good guy, yeah.
He can accept there's still honor in there and somewhere. And that was like Johnny Lawrence's way of going back to Kreese, going, what we did was wrong and we shouldn't have done this type of thing. You know what I mean? So
yeah, it is, and I think it's a good moment in the film itself. The only reason I look back at that and say, I wonder, do they now look back and go, I wish we hadn't put that in, is because they now have Cobra Kai, which builds on the tension between Johnny Lawrence and Daniel LaRusso. Like, it's using different characters, but the same way as this original film is Kreese and Miyagi, it's still the senseis, like the teachers, are still the ones that they're really where the battle's being fought, and there's pawns being used. They're the two generals in the army, and they're using these pawns to navigate them. But obviously the pawns are still young teenagers, so they have their own emotions, their own problems, and they'll have their own fights that have nothing to do with these teachers. But I think it is a very good way to end the film in its own right, though.
I suppose when they shot it, they didn't realize they were going to do a 2 or a 3, or there was going to be a Cobra Kai.
Yeah, exactly. So they just kind of, they used this as the, this is a nice little send off, and it as we say, like, it's a PG film. It was created for kids, and as most kids films are, it's a happy ending. It's always, you're given that happy ending where the good guy wins, and the bad guy he either realizes his mistake or he gets vanquished completely. And that Johnny Lawrence realizes his mistake.
Yeah, I think the overlying message in it is that, you can be different and still do okay. and
Yeah.
still kind of fit in. And you can also be a bad guy, but you can also fix that or somewhere along the way when you
Yeah,
recognize
you can
you
change
can
that. You can
change.
change who you are,
Yeah,
become the good guy. Yeah.
yeah. So I think and they're two very powerful messages, especially for youth.
Yeah, and I think that's, and a lot of people, like, as I said, I look at that and I'm looking at it with kind of an adult's perspective where, I'm kind of critiquing it. So like, I'm like, oh, he shouldn't have landed on that foot, and maybe that bit shouldn't have been there. But that's not how that's not how films should be viewed. And I think this kind of, without getting too much into it, this is kind of how wrestling is as well. I think a lot of us that do watch wrestling kind of view it that way, where we critique it and we don't just accept the story for what it is. And I think that's kind of the problem, is that we don't do that. And that's kind of what I've done there, is I've kind of critiqued it. And I knew I was critiquing it. I knew that that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
So I was very aware of the fact that I was doing that.
Yeah.
And I still really enjoy the film, and I can see why it was done, because that's what it's for. It's for kids. It's to deliver this message, to let them know, yes, you might have done things wrong in your life, but you can change that. If you've been essentially a bully, because that's what Johnny Lawrence is in this film. He bullies Daniel LaRusso. He's been a bully, and here's you essentially apologizing, saying, you're all right. It's not great. Like, he's not going, I'm sorry for all the things I did, but I think that would have been overkill. It would have been too much. So this idea of, I've now got respect for you. I've now, I see you as a peer, not as an adversary.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you want to teach kids. Like, yes, okay, you might have had a problem with this person in the past, but you can move past it. You can find something you're both interested in and move past that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, certainly a very powerful message.
Yeah. Overall, I just went back and watched this last night, and obviously I wouldn't have watched it as it came out, but like as a kid, I would have seen it. It would have been shown to me, and I remember that feeling. Like, oh, this is a great film when I was a kid. And sometimes you go back and watch something, and you're like, how did I sit down and think this was great as a kid? Like, really, like, what sort of idiot? And it's like, if you sit down with like nieces or nephews or kids or something, they're watching something, you're like, how the hell did I find this entertaining? Like, this is terrible. Like some of the cartoons or whatever film, you sit down, you're like, Jesus Christ, how is this holding their attention? So like, sometimes I kind of fear sometimes going back and watching these old films that I do have a kind of reverence for and a good memory of. But this isn't one of them. I've gone back and I've watched it and I've enjoyed it. Like, at no point was I really distracted in this film. I know the outcome. I know how it ends, but that doesn't change it for me. I still really enjoyed this film, and I think that shows a real testament to what sort of film this was, how good it was.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You're the same as well. You've gone back and watched it, and you've the same kind of opinion. Like,
I'd kind of watch this anyway, you know what I mean? Like, it's just I love this kind of stuff, you know what I mean? Like,
I'm the same. Like, I go back and watch this stuff, but like, I specifically went back to rewatch this last night just to make sure that it was as fresh in my mind as I could.
I suppose the key thing about it, this is a movie you would watch regardless of us doing this podcast, you know what I mean?
Exactly,
so that's the sentiment that's in it, you know what I mean? And it apart from the nostalgia effect and stuff like that, there's good life goals in there as well and stuff like that. And it is that people can change, and don't always channel your mind into a single thinking and stuff like that, and all that. People can evolve and change and become better people. And don't always judge a book by its cover. Miyagi is a prime example of that. Never judge a book by its cover, you know what I mean?
The first time he meets Miyagi seems very kind of dismissive. He knocks on the door and Miyagi just answers, yeah. And then he goes to open the door and Miyagi doesn't seem welcoming to him at all. So even from the very start, you learn not to judge a book by a cover, because Miyagi seems very dismissive and, secluded and not a nice person at the start. Very don't come near me sort of thing. But then, Miyagi learns, and he kind of judges LaRusso as well, even though he's a kid. He thinks this kid's kind of a bit brash and a bit arrogant opening his door. And then he goes to the house to fix the faucet, and he sees he's fixing that, and he sees LaRusso doing the karate and that he's training hard and things like that. And it changed, both of their opinions of each other change very quickly once they get to know each other. And I think, as you say, it's a very good message of, don't just judge the book by its cover, because it's not just as his teams.
Yeah, it's an all-round feel-good movie, really. You know what I mean?
It is, and I'm glad I went back to watch it.
Yeah, that's timeless.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be films that we go back and watch here, and I'm sure there's going to be a couple that I go back and watch, and I'm like, oh, that really doesn't hold up, or some of the stuff in that is a bit risky, and Jesus, you're probably like, how did they get away with that? Certain things like, but this isn't one of them. I think everything in this is it's a very good representation of kind of that teenage sort of angst in the kids, but with a lot of life messages for younger kids as well, and kids of that age group. I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad I really enjoyed it, because as I said, there's always that fear that you'll go back and realize that the fond memories you have of something are they're a bit over exaggerated, and that you're only remembering them through rose tinted glasses. But I think even if I hadn't seen this film, I think it's one that I would enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's kind of this show all wrapped up. I'll give you a chance to plug your own shows. We gave them a small plug at the start, but
yeah, well, we're dropping weekly shows at the moment now. We have the Upper Tier podcast, which is on the Dynamo Podcast Network, also on YouTube. Drop a subscribe on it. That's our football show that we do kind of weekly or bi-weekly, pending if we've bonus shows. We're obviously going to be dropping extra content in January because the transfer window's open and stuff like that. And then obviously I'm one of the members on the 4 Podmen over there with Jay, my tag partner, Ian, obviously, who's the OG of the network, and Joe, who's just come on, the Beef Joe Duignan's doing a great job. We just did our first show there together. Great dynamic and stuff like that. Really enjoying the pod, man, because it's 4 guys coming from 4 very different views, but with very passionate opinions about how we felt about moments of time in wrestling and stuff like that. So really enjoying about those. Obviously, Peter's on the Upper Tier with me. Peter's my partner on the Upper Tier, and he obviously has the Superior comic book show. That he pumps out once a week as well. Great content there for anyone who's into their comics or, all that kind of superhero kind of stuff. He's pumping out great content. Go over there and check it out. Again, all available on YouTube and all your podcast apps. And now we have this one now, the retro one, which is Retrotainment, which is going to be really, really cool, and really look forward to more episodes of this. Going to be really fantastic.
Yeah, and we'll definitely have you back on again, Niall. As we said, it was basically your idea that I've kind of usurped and taken to myself. It was it was in a way kind of similar to the Dynamo's Half Dozen, which in a lot of times was just me and Ian going back and watching old pay-per-views, which is basically what Retrotainment is going to be about, but it won't just be based on wrestling. But that just kind of leads to, as you were saying, Joe has joined the 4 Podmen, and obviously this week's episode was Royal Rumble 2000, which was a pay-per-view that I did remember fondly. And I haven't gone back and watched, but I did listen to the episode, and I was like, the lads are right. There was a lot of stuff on this that was a bit like, I kind of remember the Rumble itself, and I remember Triple H and Cactus Jack, and that a lot, and the Hardys and the Dudleys in the ladder, the tables match. That's it though, really. And like, I always think that was a great pay-per-view, but when I look back at it, I'm like when you were talking about it, I was like, geez, I don't even remember the rest of those matches. Like, that's all I remember. Like, what I did like was Joe did very well for the first podcast that he's jumped in on. He's a great addition to it, and I loved his death stats.
Yeah, he's really good that way as well. Joe's a trained pro wrestler himself. He obviously started out in NWA with Ian and stuff like that. And as far as I know, him and Ian had their first wrestling match together and stuff like that.
Oh,
so
that's interesting.
There's a dynamic there between the two boys anyway, But yeah, it's great to have him on board, and he's going to be brilliant for the podcast. And it's just he's so Joe, he's so matter of fact when he talks about wrestling. It's brilliant. Whereas like myself and Jay can sort of go off into the clouds at times, and you can see the nostalgia and the love and the romance comes out in the way we talk about it. Whereas Joe tends to bring us back down to earth and stick with the facts of
which I think is a great addition to the 4 Podmen, because I've been on the one episode for Chris Jericho, but like all of us, and Ian as well, even though he is the head honcho, we all kind of get sidetracked and kind of waffle off on a bit. Joe's that real straight shooter. He's like, lads, get back on track. Like let's let's try and keep this.
You kind of need that, because the romance can overtake it. And obviously, with Ian being the host, he obviously has very strong views on it and stuff like that, and obviously directs the episodes very well. But he needs someone like Joe there who keeps it on track. Because myself and Jay, we tend to go into the romance of pro wrestling a lot, you know.
Yeah, but Ian gets pulled off on that as well. Like, as he does try to keep you on track as well, but he gets pulled off on that as well, because you start romanticizing about things, and then he gets pulled into it as well.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to be, and it takes him a while, and then he realizes in his own head, he's like, I've just spent fucking 15 minutes with these lads waffling on. I better get these back on track, which Joe, I think, is a great addition, because he kind of lets you do it for 5 minutes, and then he goes, no, back to business here, lads. Let's get this show back on the road.
And in fairness to Joe did brilliant, because myself and Jay had him wound up terribly the week before the podcast.
Oh, really?
we were giving him a terrible time about the choice of pay-per-view and everything, and you know, to the point where I'm thinking he came with pages of information armed to the gill. he thought me and Jay were just gonna go in big time, but no, it was a great episode, and great to have him on board.
That's a great little tidbit to get from, like, you know, the backstage sort of process of the show. But there's loads of shows now on the podcast, Dynamo's podcast network. There's obviously the one that started it all, Dynamo's Dozen, where Ian, that tends to be more of a kind of interview based podcast, where he has different guests on, some really big ones. As you said, we're now on YouTube. We will be adding some of those old episodes, because some of the names that he's had on that are just, they're too big not to pump out into YouTube. Like, obviously we won't have live video, because that's not how it was done back then. But no, there's some of them that are just too big to the likes of Phil Anselmo, Harley Race, which was a huge one. There's so many that people need to go back and listen to on his show alone.
Yeah, it's a fantastic catalogue. I mean, if you haven't checked out that back catalogue on Dynamo's Dozen, I mean, Ian's been working relentlessly for the last 3 years on that, dropping episodes and stuff like that. And it's a fantastic catalogue, but it's also a quite diverse catalogue. I mean, he gets into a lot of stuff. I mean, he's had conspiracy guys on, you know, Ricky Knight's been on, Paige's dad and the family and stuff like that. I think Dynamite Kids' son, I think, was on and stuff like that. Now, they've had a ton of people on.
Yeah, there's a lot of wrestling on it, but I wouldn't like people to think that this is, you know, it's just a wrestling podcast, because he's had comedians on, as you said, he's had conspiracy guys on, he's had musicians on. It is very diverse, and it's great to see that it's still going so well for him. So, and he has some. I'm not going to give away any guest names now, but he's told us a few of the guests that he has coming up, and some of these are huge names. Some of them that I'm really looking forward to hearing their opinions on the fields that they focus in.
Yeah, no, he's a very strong catalogue coming up as well, and it's brilliant because it's going to be videoed as well now for YouTube and stuff like that, which is a great development. And I mean, in terms of even the network itself evolving, I mean, we're only in its infancy. It's only up a couple of months, really, you know what I mean? But it's really doing really well. And you've Dara dropping his content every week as well with the ASI podcast covering.
I think that's changed its name now as well. The ASI podcast is now I can't remember the name of it. It's something to do with American football, which I am not up on. But it's changed its name, and then Carl is King Woe's Court with the music. So even if you're not into certain bits, the network, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to cater to the different genres that people might be into. Because although you might not be into pro wrestling, so the 4 Pod Men isn't for you. If you're into football, obviously the upper tier is there for you to listen in. And obviously with YouTube now, it's very interactive, because you can comment down below your opinions, what you think of the episode, if you agree or disagree with. And we're all quite active on the YouTube page as well ourselves, to try and, if someone does comment, we respond back. If they're trying to,
don't be scared to comment, because we're not that sensitive, you know what I mean? If you have something you want to say, please say it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and if there's something you want to hear discussed as well, like if you want to hear a certain topic discussed, like,
absolutely,
it might not be something we've thought of, so put it down there. Like, we'll put it on the list, and if we can get a good show out of it, 100%.
or if you feel there's something that you can add to the network or something you'd like to get involved in, certainly hit up Ian, and let him know, because he's very open to people coming on board. He's very open to new shows.
Very easy to get into a
Yeah,
discussion about it with him as well. Like as he said on the podcast with Peter, they'd only known each other a couple of weeks before they'd
yeah,
gotten, to this point where where Peter was going to have this podcast on the
yeah,
network. Like, so
yeah.
it's not like he's not a difficult guy to contact, and he's not a
No,
difficult guy to sort out
no.
what you want to do with.
No. And Ian is all about the opportunity. He's all about giving people the opportunity. If you've got a good idea for a show, or you want to come on as a guest or anything like that, he's all into that. He's all into that. He's all into giving people opportunity. He's all into, expanding the network and getting it to grow. So if you have good ideas, hit him up. The email is there. You'll get him on, most people know where he is on social media at this stage. And it's 2021 is going to be a good year for the Dynamo Podcast Network. I can see it expanding greatly into a lot of shows, a lot of additional content. So drop over there, give it a subscribe, support it, especially during these times, because we're working hard to bring content to people, especially during these times when people are struggling with their mental health, are locked down, are at home. And you never know, maybe it's time to look at the things that you like and maybe open yourself up to other things
Yeah,
that
it
you
is
might enjoy.
definitely.
If your thing is wrestling, maybe you might get involved and enjoy a bit of the football stuff, or certainly most people will enjoy this retro podcast, because it's fantastic. Everyone loves nostalgia and loves retro.
Yeah.
But also, if American football isn't your thing, go over, check out Darren and his content. You never know, there might be something in there that you might latch onto and you might enjoy it.
Yeah, like that's I'm not into American football myself, but like the first few podcasts I did listen to, it's kind of like there's an interest there in American football for me. It's the wrong side. I am very interested in the tactical side of American football,
Yeah,
whereas this is how the coach
yeah,
says to make the play, but you don't
yeah.
get to watch that.
Yeah. And Dara, in fairness, Dara with his content, he's very good at putting that across as well.
He is, and see
He,
that was the problem. He put that across, and I was like, I could get into American football with this, but you
yeah,
don't get to see that, and that's kind of why I don't watch American football. But I do enjoy listening to that and hearing the tactical side, because that's something that I actually am very into,
yeah,
even though like a lot of people wouldn't be into that. But it's something that I think is very interesting. This idea of how you're going to make this play. Like, why would you play that against this?
yeah,
Why would you make that substitution? Why would you do this? I always think that's very interesting stuff. Like, and it's, sometimes it's right and sometimes it's wrong. It works for you and then it doesn't work for you.
yeah.
But
It's like a tactical chess game, really. You know what I
yeah,
mean? It's
and like that's when I was a kid. Like as you said, like chess was a game that I loved as a kid. And I think
yeah,
if you're into that sort of thing, like the Dara's podcast is something to really give a listen to, because he talks a lot about that. They do talk about the results and things like that. So maybe, if you don't want to watch the games, but you want to hear the results and hear about those, like this is the way to do it. Like if this is the way you want to follow American football, this is the way to do it.
yeah. Absolutely, absolutely.
But just before we wrap off here, I suppose we should kind of give a plug to the two sponsors of the show, get the admin right at the end so people don't have to listen to it. But obviously yourself, Niall, at Wrestling Mania in town, one of the big sponsors of Dynamo's dozen and the Dynamo Podcast Network. So therefore, all of the other shows closed again now for public, but not closed completely, because there's always that online
Yeah, we're
presence.
still doing postal orders, still doing Facebook orders, all that type of stuff, and we're going to be in the shop once a week as well for a couple of hours. Naturally, doing all the COVID cleaning and all adhering to all those guidelines and stuff like that, so we can pick up stock. And we're still getting deliveries on the daily, but they're just coming to the house now instead of the shop. So you'll still see new stock going up on the page, or if there's anything you need ordered, just get in touch with us. We can process through card, PayPal, Revolut, all that kind of stuff. So it's business as usual, but just not with the familiar face and the banter that you get in the shop, basically.
Yeah, and it's just through Facebook, isn't it? They just message on the Facebook page, is it?
Yeah, yeah, just through Facebook is perfect, or I think most of my customers at this stage have my mobile number as well at this stage and
Yeah,
contact
well,
me.
that's
So,
for the old customers that have been
yeah,
around for a while. But
yeah,
for
but
any
you'll
new customers that might want to get involved, just contact. Niall's very easy to talk to, as you can see from this podcast. Just contact him on Facebook. If he doesn't have it, he'll sort you out if he can get
yeah,
it.
yeah. Yeah, anything we can help out, even if people are struggling at the moment, they want to come on and have a chat about wrestling, or, contact me any way you want. I'm always there. Like, to be honest with you, 60 to 70% of the messages that come through with the page are more of a chat than they are a business transaction. That tends to follow on. So, like, if anyone is struggling, want to have a chat about anything, they know where we are. We're always available.
Yeah, and then the other sponsor is obviously another member of the network, Peter Hart. Is Peter Hart Graphics. He's designed a lot of the logos for the Dynamo's podcast network. I don't know, did he do the upper tiers one?
He
I
did.
think he did, didn't he? Yeah.
He does. He does all the logos and graphics mainly for the network and stuff like that.
I think he's done all of them except my one, which is just me cutting and pasting things together, because that's the way I wanted to do it. So if anyone thinks that my logo is a bit lower on the scale of compared to the other ones, well, there is a reason for that. It's because I didn't use Peter Hart Graphics, that I just decided to use it myself. He's again a really, really easy guy to contact, a really easy guy to get in contact with, really easy to talk to. And when the 4 Podmen was originally being discussed, I was in the chat when the concept of how the design for the logo to be used was being done. The original one, now these have a new one, but so it's not this new one that I was involved in, but the original one. And Peter was obviously in the chat as well as we were discussing it with him. Very open to not just criticism of that's crap, because nobody's open to that sort of criticism, but very open to criticism of tweaking things. Like, I made suggestions, some of which he was like, yeah, I could do that. Other ones he was like, he did, and then showed it to us and it looked even worse than before. So I said, nah, don't actually do that. It looks terrible. But he's very open to taking pointers. Like, he'll give you a base idea, and if you have something that you think could be added to it, he never takes it personally. So very easy business person to deal with.
Yeah, well, I suppose creating graphics and logos is an ongoing event, really. It's never a moment in time. But the key thing for Peter, one of the talents he has, is he can take a bunch of ideas off 4 guys, and he can create it into something that's quite dynamic.
Yeah, very good at it. He's very good at amalgamating ideas.
Yeah, and he's also, he's brilliant at doing some of the other stuff in the background as well. He always helps out with the uploading of shows and the creating of sort of intros, all that kind of stuff. And he runs our Twitter and Instagram on the upper tier. I do the Facebook and stuff like that, and we share those sort of jobs that have to be done and stuff like that. But he's all around good guy.
Very, very, very easy to chat to as well. So for that, those are our two big sponsors. So if you need wrestling merch, or as he said, just a bit of a chat, that's the one to go to, Wrestling Mania. And then if you need a graphic designed for anything, Peter Hart Graphics is the way to go. So thank you very much for listening, ladies and gentlemen, and we will be back again next week. We don't know the topic just yet, but if you have any suggestions, throw them down in the comments, let us know. And if it's one that we think we can do, we'll get on it. And if not, I'm sure we'll have something different for you.